In episode 7, we seemingly get the full story about what happened that fateful night on Brendok from both Osha's and the Jedi's perspective. However, there is just one tiny little explosive thing that doesn't quite add up, and that is who caused the explosion. Based on the flashbacks we were given, the timing of the explosion seemed to indicate that it was neither the witches, the Jedi, or May that caused the explosion. Given that the Jedi and the witches were in the midst of a face-off with each other, there was simply no time for either side to have caused such an event. And in the case of May, her starting the fire could be seen as a cause for the explosion, but it's not very convincing. Sure, the fire did get a little out of hand, but the location of the fire nor its intensity really gave any indication that it would set off something as big as the explosion we saw. Not to mention, the explosions all seem to be far too specific and sequential for it to have been caused by an accident. If we slow down the footage, we can actually see that the initial explosions seem to have been caused in a timed sequence, at roughly the same height level, the sort of sequence that could have occurred if someone had deliberately set off the bombs. Not to mention, the timing of the explosion seems far too coincidental in the sense that it only occurred after the death of Mother Aneseya. So what if the explosions were caused by the Sith, perhaps the Sith wishing to hide their presence and their true intentions from the Jedi? They decided to destroy all the evidence by setting off the bombs. And there are some signs that this might be the case. For one, the mystery surrounding the conception of Osha and May is far from resolved. The running Jedi theory is that they were artificially created through aversions in the Force, suspecting the witches to have done something to create the twins. But the problem is, this wasn't confirmed by the witches themselves. In fact, we aren't even sure if it was the witches alone that found the virgins and knew what to do with it, to such an extent of creating artificial life. And so it is entirely plausible that it was the Sith that secretly guided the witches through the creation of the twins, in hopes of creating artificial life strong in the Force as potential future acolytes. But once the Jedi interfered, it was time to cut losses and burn everything down. There has been a lot of speculation that there is another Sith Lord that we have yet to see, specifically Chimere's Master. The showrunner of The Acolyte has mentioned that the season will feature more than one Sith. And so, considering that we have only seen Chimere so far, we can definitely expect there to be another one. Additionally, now that we know Chimere was once a Jedi and had a Jedi Master, we also need to ask if he had a Sith Master. We know that during this time period, the Sith operated under the rule of two, a Master and Apprentice. And so you can be certain that if Chimere is following this lineage, he must have had a Sith Master as well. And I think there are a lot of signs that point towards the idea that the Sith Master in question is Darth Tenebrous himself. We already know that his name is canon, with Palpatine's Sith cult having a legion called the Tenebrous Legion. So there is clearly already some groundwork laid out for his full return to canon. And having Tenebrous as Chimere's Sith Lord probably makes the most sense outside the creation of an entirely new character. Darth Tenebrous, who was the master to Plagueis, who in turn trained Palpatine, is a pretty interesting character to bring back and one that would fit the current timeline perfectly. Given that the show is set 100 years before The Phantom Menace, if Tenebrous was canon, he should be alive and kicking at this point in time. There has been plenty of speculation online that the actor David Harewood would be playing a mystery character yet to be revealed in the show, and so Harewood could very well be playing Tenebrous and be the one responsible for the destruction of the Coven settlement. Another point to note is that Chimere's current hideout, which is located in an unknown planet, bears a lot of resemblance to a Legends planet closely related to Tenebrous. In Legends, Tenebrous and Plagueis both discover a planet by the name of Baldemnik, which was characterized by giant rock cliffs, pristine beaches, and vast oceans, all of which we have seen in the show. It is also worth noting that Baldemnik was particularly known for its rich deposits of cortosis, a material which we've already seen being used by Chimere and the presence of it on the planet as well. So what if the show decided to replace Plagueis with Chimere and have him and Tenebrous discover Baldemnik, which is why they are there in the first place? So what if after leaving the Jedi Order, Chimere ends up crossing paths with Tenebrous, who decides to take him on as an apprentice? Now you might think that Tenebrous taking in Chimere might change the story of Tenebrous recruiting Plagueis as his apprentice, but that's not necessarily the case. In Legends, Tenebrous actually had an apprentice by the name of Darth Venomous. Although Darth Tenebrous seemingly violated violated the rule of two, Darth Venomous wasn't officially conferred the title of Darth, and so he really was more of an acolyte, and the use of the name Darth was more of a self-given title. And I do think that there is a distinct possibility that the show is following a similar plotline, with Chimere being Darth Venomous, while Tenebrous and Plagueis are kicking about somewhere else. In fact, during Chimere's encounter with the Jedi, he says,
"But the Jedi like you might call me Sith."
He doesn't really call himself a Sith, but does play with the idea, which is quite in line with Darth Venomous's character. It is also worth noting that Darth Venomous was a very good duelist, possibly better than Plagueis, who was forced to use force-oriented combat to beat him once they encountered each other. And the idea that this other apprentice was an exceptional duelist does go in line with Chimere's character and what we've seen so far. We also know that Venomous, prior to his defeat at the hands of Plagueis, was also actively looking for an apprentice, something which Chimere is also actively looking for. So if we assume that Chimere is indeed the second apprentice of Tenebrous and that Tenebrous himself was Chimere's Sith Master, then it does raise the question of where he is throughout all these events. Well, for one, it is entirely possible that Tenebrous is already dead by this point, having been killed by Plagueis or Chimere, which is why we see Chimere actively searching for a pupil, with the show being a sort of transitional period as the Sith Apprentice becomes the Master looking for an apprentice. The other option is that Tenebrous is still alive and well, and is busy on the other side of the galaxy alongside his legitimate apprentice Plagueis, playing politics to plot the downfall of the Jedi. In the previous few episodes, we learned from Venestra that there is growing concern regarding the Jedi's political enemies, and we also learned from a friendly senator that there is a senator by the name of Rayankor who is actively campaigning against the Jedi. And this name was sort of dropped pretty casually out there. So what if this is really Tenebrous in disguise, or a puppet of Tenebrous as he schemes with Plagueis to make life very difficult for the Jedi? In fact, when we look to Legends, this is exactly what the two of them were doing roughly around this time period. At this point in time, the two were hard at work gathering financial and political power to enact the grand plan, leveraging easily corruptible factions such as the Trade Federation and Plagueis' own connection as the son of the former head of the Intergalactic Banking Clan. So it would very well be the case that as Tenebrous and Plagueis are busy scheming in politics, that on the other side of the galaxy we have Chimere, the illegitimate apprentice, trying to find an apprentice of his own. So it's very likely not a coincidence that so many of the show's plot points align very closely with Tenebrous' story and Legends. Regardless of how the show does it, I do think that Tenebrous reappearing in some shape or form is a very likely scenario, and simply allows the show to fill in certain gaps and mysteries. Anyways, let me know what you think in the comments down below, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.